Allie, thank you for doing this.
Yes, thank you
Really
so
grateful.
much.
Yeah. What do we? Oh,
I know.
yes.
Grinnell, it's a red baseball cap that says Grinnell College, so we're good.
Just gonna go a little bit bigger with this. Getting this, Chris. Beautiful Grinnell. And we're the pioneers.
Yes, we are the pioneers.
What do we say? Is there like a pioneer cheer
No,
or
I wish
hand
there
sign
was.
or noise?
No, just the pioneers. Yup.
Está bien?
Perfecto.
You know who that is?
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
Leon
Cleveland.
Bridges.
I think they got it.
Oh, it's
from-
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's from Fort Worth,
Oh, really?
Texas. I mean, if you haven't heard him, he's
Yeah, I was
absolutely.
wondering, this music is awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this. Let's
Are
go.
you kicking us off?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm following your lead.
Okay.
Did you go out with Allie?
Yeah, let's wait. It should be wait.
Okay, we'll let Allie go out. We'll let Allie go out.
Hello, thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. And thank you also to Hotel Grinnell for being willing to host us on such short notice. So a big thank you to them. My name is Allie Pierce, and I'm here as one of the coaches of Grinnell College Campus Democrats. And before we begin, I want to say really quickly that the Howard County Democrats are in the back and side of the room there with voter registration forms. So if you're not registered to vote here, please fill out a form and you can participate in the caucus and, of course, in the 2020 presidential election. So, as I'm sure you guys all know, we have a very special guest with us this evening. Beto O'Rourke is a 3-term U.S. House Representative from the state of Texas, where he also led a very... Yeah, Texas? And also in Texas, he ran a very nearly successful campaign against sitting Republican Senator Ted Cruz. It was close. It was so close. Beto knows that there are too many people in this country without health care. He knows how important rural development is, especially with regards to providing access to broadband internet, working infrastructure, and hospitals. Beto has 3 kids and a dog, and he knows the risks that climate change poses to all of our future. And so, without further ado, because I know we're all excited to see him, I am super excited to introduce former U.S. House Representative and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, Beto O'Rourke.
How's everybody doing? Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you very much. Let's give it up for Allie. Good job, Allie. Thank you so much. To the Hotel Grinnell, Angela and her team, thank you for hosting us here tonight. We are very, very grateful. We will not forget it. Next time we're in town, we'll be staying right here. And to each of you for taking some time out of your Friday evening to spend it with us, unless you were already here to begin with, just hanging out, having a good time. But if you came to welcome this stranger from far west Texas, just know that we are grateful. Do I have some Texans? Do I have any El Pasoans? We got one! Class of 60, right on, you may have known my dad, that'll work, yeah. Right on. To all of you who did not go to high school in El Paso, you're also welcome here. And I'm grateful that you came out. I was thinking on this beautiful drive-in from Marshalltown. There we go. Thinking about it being a Friday night. Some of you may be here on a date. You're not think of anything more romantic than coming to a political rally and town hall. And as I was thinking about that, I remember how I had met my wife Amy back in 2004, long time ago. We were set up on a blind date. Now this is pre-Tinder or internet-aided dating. It was Amy's Aunt Beth who called me, said that Amy was coming into town, had just been in Guatemala for a year, not from El Paso, didn't know anybody, was visiting some relatives. Would I take her out? I said, absolutely, would be happy to. Went to pick her up at the home that she was staying, and then drove her to downtown El Paso. We went over the bridge that connects us to Ciudad Juarez. We had a drink at the Kentucky Club, which invented the margarita, they say. Decent. It's the place that I'd like to think that Bob Dylan wrote Tom Thumb's Blues. Maybe where Johnny Cash bought his drugs that he was busted for when he crossed back into El Paso. Maybe where Elizabeth Taylor drowned her sorrows after her first divorce, first marriage, first honeymoon spent in El Paso, Texas. She married the heir of the Hilton Hotel fortune, and the first high-rise Hilton Hotel, or at least one of them, was in El Paso, Texas, and that's where she came. And so I'm telling Amy these stories to try to impress her about this place that I love so much. Juarez, El Paso, the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. In all of the Americas, from the tip of the Arctic Circle down to Patagonia, no two countries come together in the way that the United States and Mexico do in El Paso and Juarez. 3 million, two countries, speaking two languages, two cultures, two histories, joined and not divided by the Rio Grande River to form something far greater in the sum of their parts or the number of people. And I'm trying to lay all this out at the bar at the Kentucky Club, we're thinking. We leave there, we have dinner next door at Martino's, which is still there, so when you visit Ciudad Juarez, I encourage you to have a meal there. Walk down Avenida Juarez, and we go to the old customs house, which was a pivotal site in the Battle of Juarez. Madero's forces, as they sought to overthrow the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, telling Amy some of that history, and letting her know that the first time that a president of the United States of America and a president of Mexico ever met, it was there at that customs house in 1909. It was Porfirio Diaz and it was Taft. And neither of them needed a translator because both of them spoke both English and Spanish. From there, we walk on to the Mission of Guadalupe, which has stood the test of time for something like 330 years. And we sit on this little park bench in the placita in front of the mission, and we just take in the sights and the sounds and the smells of this community. People dancing to the bands that are just playing on the street, plugging into the AC outlets on the street. Really beautiful, really amazing. Part of the way in which we have fallen in love. Part of our memory about this community that we're now raising our 3 kids in. Ulysses, who's 12, his sister Molly, who's 10, their little brother Henry, who is 8 years old. And El Paso, Texas, happens to be, 20 years running, one of the safest cities in the United States of America. Safe, not despite the fact that we're a city of immigrants. A quarter of those of whom we live in El Paso were born in another country. They left their hometown, their family, their language, their customs, what they knew, to become strangers in a strange land, to do better for themselves and for their kids, but to do better for all of us, and they have, and their very presence has made us stronger, more successful, and yes, though it flies in the face of the rhetoric from this president, what you might see on cable television, it has made us more secure as a country. So I want to tell you that when we elected a person who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, though they commit violent crimes at a lower rate than those born in this country, when he sought to ban all travel by Muslims to the United States of America, though we are a country of Muslims and Jews and Christians and atheists and people from all walks of life and traditions of faith, because perhaps he wants us to think that we are somehow inherently dangerous or violent or a threat to fellow Americans. When he called Klansmen and Nazis and white supremacists very fine people, not only did it offend our senses, not only did it provoke a 3rd grade girl in El Paso, Texas, at LBJ Elementary to ask, why does the president not like me? She's a third-grade child, Mexican-American. What does that do to her head? Her conception of herself, what she's going to be able to do in this country, for this country. And when I shared that story in Houston, Texas, the parents of another third-grade girl said, that hits home with us because our daughter came home from school because she's Muslim, asked if she's in the right country. Though she was born here, though we were born here, in my mind it wouldn't matter if they were just as American as anyone else in this country. It's not just the rhetoric and the damage done to our children. It's the fact that for the last 3 years, you've seen an increase in hate crimes every single one of those years. It's because in 2017, when the president signed his executive order that sought to ban Muslim travel to the United States, on that very day, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, was burned to the ground. It's because when kids came here from Central America, sometimes without a parent or a friend or a relative, sometimes in the hands of a coyote or a smuggler, very often traveling those 2,000 miles on foot or atop a train, not inside of one, called the beast or la bestia, that they ended up in cages. They showed up with their parents, that mom who fled with those kids for her very life and for those kids and risked her life in the process, is deported back to the very country that she sought to leave in the first place, with no hope of ever seeing that daughter for whom she risked her life again. These policies follow our speech, the words that we use, the man that this country elected to be president of the United States. And in a democracy, if we still are one, we are the government is the people. So lay this at the feet of no one man, no matter how powerful, or whatever office he holds and occupies at this moment, no one political party. This one, for as long as it persists, is on all of us. And so here's my proposal to you. Let's never again take another child from another mother or father at their most desperate and vulnerable moment at the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's make sure that all families that have been separated are reunited at once. That we use every resource within our command to connect those families again, because until we do, that is tantamount to torture. It is a cruelty that we are visiting on these kids each and every single day. They are kept apart from their parents. Let's make sure that we follow our own asylum laws and people who are fleeing the deadliest places on the planet today. Because there's no other reason that you would give your 6-year-old daughter over to a smuggler. There's no other reason that you would scoop up your 6-month-old child in your arms and make that journey unless you thought you had no other choice. But then let's go one step further. Because we can greet these asylum seekers and refugees with open arms. We can greet them with a 2,000-mile, 30-foot-high, $30 billion wall. We can greet them with cages. We can greet them with our sympathy. Or we can make sure that we invest in resolving those problems in the countries of origin, in El Salvador, in Honduras, in Guatemala. This president has proposed zeroing out every single dime that we invest in trying to resolve those problems in the Northern Triangle today. All $500 million wiped out. And you and I both know exactly what that will produce. That punishment, that punitive action will not keep anybody from fleeing misery or crushing poverty or certain death for their kids. It wouldn't keep you from doing what was best for your kids either. So I say, don't just restore that $500 million, double it. Make sure that we invest in violence reduction in those communities. What we have shown, so when we have looked at this, when we reduced violence in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador in those communities, fewer children leave, fewer moms pick up and try to make that 2,000-mile journey. And every dollar that we invest there saves $1 or $2 or some multiple of what we spend preventatively in taking care of the problem once it reaches our front door. I want to make sure that we have an intelligent foreign policy that we can be proud of. Those friends against whom we have turned our backs, our traditional allies, Alliance forged in sacrifice and war going back 80 years ago. Let's renew those partnerships. Let's make sure that those to whom we are connected by land in the Western Hemisphere are our priority as well going forward. It is so much smarter for us to make sure that we're looking out for those who might end up here in our communities. We don't invest in them first in theirs. I want to make sure that we do the smart thing while we still can. I also want to make sure that on this larger issue of immigration reform, in addition to following our asylum laws, let's understand that there are more than 1 million dreamers here in this country, came at a very young age, may not speak the language in their country of origin any longer, may no longer have family there. And if we deport them back there, and they are successful against those long odds, they'll be successful for that country and that place, not Iowa, not the United States of America. What if we freed those dreamers with any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens here in this country that they're also contributing so much to already? Make sure that we don't do it at the expense of their parents, the original dreamers. Allow them to get on a path to contribute to their maximum potential as well. Do not do it at the cost of militarizing our communities or constructing that 2,000-mile wall, which, as you know, will not be built on the true international boundary between the United States and Mexico. That's the center line of the Rio Grande River channel. It'll be built well into the interior, causing us to take someone's farm, another person's ranch, someone else's home, with the power of eminent domain at a time that communities like mine that are actually on the border are among the safest in the United States today. It's a solution in search of a problem that we do not have. If we want real security, si queremos asegurar nuestras comunidades, then we need to treat every single one of us with the respect and dignity that we are owed as human beings. That's how you find security here in America. The challenges before us at this moment, in addition to those that I've described, are the greatest of our lifetimes. Here we are in a country, the most powerful, the wealthiest the world knows, the wealthiest, the most powerful the world has ever known. And yet there are people today dying of diabetes in the United States, consumed by the flu in this country, dying of curable cancers, not because we don't have the resources or the medical technology, but we lack the political will to do the right thing while we still can. We need to have universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for every child, every woman, every man in this country. And that means primary health care for everyone. That means in a country where one of the largest providers of mental health care services is the county jail system, to the point that those with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression too often are getting arrested on purpose because the county jail is the one place they are guaranteed the care that they will receive, the clothes on their back, the meal before them, the prescription of the psychotropic medication that make life temporarily bearable for them at a cost to you and to me of somewhere around $100 to $110 a night. For a fraction of that expense, we can invest in their long-term continuous care. So universal care also needs to mean universal access to mental health care. And in a country that's in the midst of a crisis in maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color, universal health care also means that every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the health care and allows her to do that. And if we are a country that really believes in justice for all, and that no man or woman or corporation is above the law or below the law, then let's stare squarely in the face the fact that we have the largest prison population per capita on the face of the planet today, here in this country. And it is a prison population that is disproportionately comprised of people of color. Far too many there doing time for non-violent drug crimes. including possession of marijuana, a substance that is decriminalized or legalized in most states of the Union. Why should another person spend another night in jail for possession of cannabis? So here's my proposal. Let's end the federal prohibition on marijuana. Let's expunge the arrest records for those caught for possession. Let's end for-profit prisons in this country. Nobody should be and though this is tough for us to talk about, I think it's incredibly necessary. Let's also acknowledge that ever since its founding, this country has a history of criminalizing people and communities based on the color of their skin. It's not just slavery, it is segregation, it is Jim Crow, it is voter suppression today. It's the fact that at 5 years old, in the kindergarten classroom, if you are a child of color, you're 5 times as likely to be disciplined, suspended, or expelled as a white child for the same infractions in front of the same teacher. That schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline begins not in high school, begins when you are defenseless at 5 years old. So it also must mean that we recruit and we retain teachers who look like their students, who believe in their students, who give their students every chance to succeed. And in an economy that works too well for too few and not well enough for far too many, I want to make sure that every single one of us, every one of our kids, has every opportunity in life. I want to make sure that we invest in a world-class pre-K through 12 public education system, paying our educators a real salary so they don't have to get on a second or a third job. I want to make sure that those in their charge graduate both college ready to go on to higher education, that is free if it's community college, that is debt-free if it is a public 4-year university financed by a local government, a state government, or the national government. And I also want to make sure that those young women and men are career ready. The ability to join a union, to enter an apprenticeship that will give them a trade or a skill that will allow them to live with dignity, to have purpose and function in their lives, and to command a real living wage for the rest of their lives. And those union jobs, they've got to be there when you're 18 years old. They've got to be there when you're 35 years old and you just raised your kids and you're returning to the workforce. They've got to be there when you're 40 years old. You're returning from combat and service to this country. You want to reintegrate in the success of your hometown and be able to provide for your family. They've got to be there when your job has been automated out of existence. You need a new opportunity, a new lease, new hope, and a new career. I want to make sure that at a time that we weakened and diminished the power of unions, that we stand together to strengthen them going forward. But if we are going to do any of this, and if we're going to meet our greatest challenges, then we're going to need all of us. Not going to be able to do it by half measure. We will not do it with only half the country. Not only does it need to be Republicans and Democrats and independents, it has to be the millions today who do not vote. Some who've been written out of their democracy. My home state of Texas, we ranked 50th in voter turnout before 2018. Not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in Iowa, but some people, based on their race, the color of their skin, their country of national origin, literally drawn out of a congressional district, therefore a reason to vote, therefore their very democracy in Texas. You can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but in Texas you cannot use your student ID from the University of Texas at Austin to prove who you are at the ballot box. It's very clear who Texas wants to vote, who Texas would prefer did not show up at those polls. One person, one vote in this country. We're going to end gerrymandering where members of Congress choose their own vote. money out of our politics. That's why I don't take a single dime from a single political action committee. And that's why we're going to have same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. When you turn 18, you are registered to vote, and we expect you to do so. Lastly, before I turn it over to you and listen to your questions and your comments and your suggestions, the biggest challenge that we face, I hope you agree, is one that we are already enduring right now, trying to survive. We live along the banks of the Missouri River. The Missouri River Basin has seen 4 times the water runoff of an average year. The greatest level of runoff since we've been keeping records on the Missouri River. Houston, Texas, my home state, saw 58 inches of rain fall from the sky in 2017, the landfall record for as long as we've been keeping them in North America. That was the 3rd 500-year flood in Southeast Texas in 5 years. They should be set for the next 1,500 years. But the scientists tell us that they are not. Those floods, those storms, those fires in California, those droughts in the panhandle of Texas, through which those farmers try to persist in growing our food and the fiber that feeds and clothes not just America, but so much of the rest of the world, become more frequent, more profound, more devastating, not just of property, but of human life. Those same scientists who told us that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980, say that it is still within our power over the next 10 years to prevent it from warming yet another degree Celsius, after which these natural / man-made disasters will only become that much worse. Not for us necessarily or only, but especially for our kids and our grandkids and the people of the future whose judgment we should fear, who will be looking back on us from the future to the people of 2019, the people of 2020, saying, when you knew, beyond the shadow of a doubt, what was happening, and that you still had time to act, what did you do or what did you not do? We have to lead the way in freeing this country and our economy from a dependence on fossil fuels, investing in renewable energy, in wind and solar, which, by the way, are the 2 fastest growing jobs in the United States of America today. Encouraging and incentivizing farmers in rural communities to be allowed to do their part because they want to do so. Encouraged to plant cover crops to pull more carbon out of the air. Precision tilling and farming to disturb less of the carbon that is in the soil. Every single one of us wants to be able to do our part, and until we do, we will not once again be able to take our rightful role as the indispensable nation to convene the other countries of this planet together to meet an otherwise intractable problem. We alone can do this for ourselves and for the people of this planet and those who are counting on us in the future, and we cannot be found wanting. But it's this democracy, it is our economy, it is these changes that we need to make so that we are well enough to pursue this work we will have to accomplish if we're going to be able to do this. At this moment of division and polarization and hyperpartisanship and a president who preys upon our differences of race, of ethnicity, of sexual orientation, of religion, we cannot allow those differences to divide us or to define us. Instead, we must be known forever after by our ambitions, our aspirations, the resolve, the determination, the creativity, the service, and yes, the sacrifice that we will bring to bear to achieve them. That's why I'm running to serve you as President of the United States of America. And I'm so grateful to be doing it for each and every single one of you. Thank you, Grinnell, for having us out. Looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Cynthia here on stage left has got a microphone and is happy to bring it to you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Dorothy North from Grinnell. I'm Being able to work with others is a talent. However, what issues would you not compromise on? I have concerns with equality, LGBTQ. I'd like to hear your response.
You got it. First of all, please thank your daughter for me for voting for us in the last election. Every single one of the 6 years that I served in Congress, I was in the minority party. 2 of those years, we had a Republican president with whom I agreed on almost nothing. And yet, were I to come back to my constituents in a town hall meeting like this and say, you know what, folks, love to be able to help you out. I know I represent 750,000 of you, and I'm the one voice for this community, but these Republicans, they just don't want to work with me. And we got to wait until we change the composition of Congress or we get a different person in power in the White House. They would not have bought that, nor should they have. So when I learned that we have the worst performing VA in the country for mental health care access, that means veterans coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, waiting not weeks, not months, in some cases years, some cases never able to get in to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist. That was not unconnected to the record level of suicides we're seeing amongst veterans. So that became an urgent priority for us to fix, and it was not going to allow politics to get in the way. We were able to turn around the performance of the El Paso VA, so it is no longer worst in the country, and sometimes exceeds, improves upon the national average in response times. We won't be satisfied until we're number 1. But I also learned at a meeting like this from another veteran that those who came back with other than honorable discharges, by law, were precluded from even setting foot in the VA or even standing in one of those lines at all, and their rate of suicide was twice as high. So we wrote a bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act, to allow them to be able to see those mental health care providers at the VA. But that bill, as a member of the minority, was going nowhere unless I could find a Republican with whom I could work. And we did. And we prevailed upon our college and said, yes, it's more expensive to take care of more veterans, but shouldn't we pay any price, bear any burden for those who are willing to give their lives for this country? Yes, there should be a consequence for your status of discharge, but that consequence cannot be paid in your life. We were able to get that passed in the House of Representatives, 435 to 0. We got it passed in the United States Senate, also controlled by Republicans, and put on the desk of Donald J. Trump, a man with whom I agree on just about nothing. But we found enough common ground and common cause to get that done. He signed it into law. Now more veterans get mental health care access. We are saving lives in the process. But there are some things you cannot compromise on without compromising yourself. A woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body. I don't see any way to compromise on that one. You specifically mentioned the LGBTQ community in Texas and across this country. Iowans should be proud in celebrating the 10th-year anniversary of the Supreme Court decision here. What you did, your advocacy, your activism, your vote, they produced a change that distinguished you in this country. But back home in Texas, it is legal to fire you for being gay. Legal not to hire you for the first place based on your sexual orientation. In Texas, we seriously debated a bathroom ban bill to try to freak parents out about transgender kids. Though those transgender kids are more likely to be the victims than the perpetrators of attacks in those school halls. In Texas, it is legally defensible to kill somebody of the same sex that they've come onto. In Texas, 30,000 kids in the foster care system, so underfunded was CPS and understaffed that kids were sleeping on the desks, under the desks, and yet in Texas you can be too gay to be able to adopt one of those kids. So that's not something I will compromise on. As president, I will sign into law the Equality Act that protects the full civil rights of every single American, including LGBTQ Americans in every community. Thank you for the question. I'm going to go to where the microphone is right
To your
here.
left, is the staff over there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I want to ask you a question about immigration. I am an immigrant myself,
and I have family members who are supported by funds from the federal government, so I can certainly sympathize with immigration views on the left. However, as international students, and a quarter of the students here are international students, and I have friends who graduated from prestigious colleges and universities like this, who work as engineers or scientists and pay tens of thousands of dollars in taxes every year to the federal and state government. But for them, they basically have to they have to draw lots every year, and if they don't have any luck in a year or 3 years, depending on their occupation, they have to leave this country. Do you think there is a discrepancy between the current liberal view of immigration between the students, the professionals who study here, who work here, who are making a positive contribution to this country in monetary or scientific terms, and the immigrants crossing the border in the South who also perhaps have a claim on staying here because of the humanitarian crisis they are facing? Do you think this inconsistency? Do you think there is such an inconsistency? And do you think it's because our attention and our drawn to whoever are experiencing the most visible plights? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. You raise a host of important issues. And I think you point out that we have an opportunity to demonstrate our values in the laws that we write. If we're going to rewrite our immigration laws, let's rewrite them in our own image of our communities, of our success, of the foundation of this country's success. And let's acknowledge that there are people who are going to come here. Some of these asylum seekers that I described from the Northern Triangle countries of Central America, who aren't going to provide value in the same measurable way as someone who graduates with a PhD, or someone with an investor visa who has an extra $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million to invest and literally purchase their way into this country. There are some who suggest that family reunification should no longer be a priority in our immigration law. It should be means tested. Those who can contribute the most in a way that we can measure immediately, financially or academically, should be prioritized for entrance into this country. What I don't want to do is fall into the trap of pitting some immigrants against other immigrants. There is value in everyone who wants to come here and contribute to the success of this country. But I also want to acknowledge that there are some who are waiting in line to come to this country to be with their families. There are some who graduated from Grinnell or the University of Texas at El Paso who are now back in their home countries because they cannot find a timely legal way to be here in this country. So let's raise the visa caps so that when we ask you to get into the back of the line to join your family or come back to Iowa after you graduated, that line does not stretch 20 years, which it does today. Let's make sure that we understand so many of the small towns that I have visited in Texas, that I've visited in Iowa, are being revived by immigrants. I was just talking to a guy named Diego today, and he runs the Delicias Bakery in Storm Lake. And we had a conversation entirely in Spanish, and I said, how did you come to Storm Lake? How did your family come here? They followed the jobs at Tyson's, working in meat packing plants, doing work that, let's be honest, very few Americans born in that community or anywhere in the United States of America are willing to do. Same is true on the cotton growing farms in Texas or the cotton gins. So much is true in so much of the backbreaking work in this country right now. And yet now, Diego owns a business, invested the money that he made in the success of that community. That is the story across the United States of America. So I think the opportunity we have, from the question that you asked, is not to do this piecemeal or to pit one group against another, but to do it comprehensively for all who can contribute to the value of this country, whether they're coming from the Northern Triangle or whether they're graduating here from Grinnell. That's the approach that I want to take. Thank you for the question.
Your words on climate change really resonated with me. But I would like to hear more about what practical steps you see moving forward for climate change, specifically because you have voted to expand oil rigs and oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Various environmental groups have showed through statistical analysis that you vote far more Republican and far more for environmental regulation. So how would you reconcile your history of environmental deregulation with your hopes for climate change?
Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. So to answer the first part of your question, and then I will take the second part of your question, what specific steps can we do? First day, reinstitute the Clean Power Plan, which was implemented under President Obama and has been withdrawn by President Trump. Re-sign with the rest of the world, literally, to the Paris Climate Agreements, which in itself will not be sufficient, but is a good step in the right direction. If we're going to exhibit any leadership, moral, diplomatic, political, or otherwise, then we need to be signed up. Ensure that we re-up on our clean vehicle standards, again, that are being decimated by this administration. Appoint people to positions of public trust, including at the EPA and Department of the Interior, who actually believe in the functions that their departments oversee. Make sure that we're not leasing our public lands to those who will drill on those public lands. Ensure that if the president is successful in the Alaskan Natural Wildlife Refuge in his drilling attempts there, that we pull that back immediately, at once. Invest in renewable energies. I mentioned your leadership here in Iowa, our leadership in Texas, the fact that solar and wind are the two fastest growing jobs in this country right now. We need to do more of that and ultimately free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and do that as quickly as possible. Get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as we can, 2030 or as soon thereafter as possible. So that's the goal, and those are some of the actions that I would take. And you say, reconcile this with your history, and I will do my best. I drove here in a Dodge Grand Caravan, and that was a choice I made. And I hope in future trips, and certainly in my life, I'm doing more in electric vehicles that hopefully are taking electricity from a grid that is producing it by solar and wind and other renewable energy resources. That's on me. But many people in this country are also driving automobiles. Many people in this world are as well. We're going to have to extract those natural resources from somewhere. Some countries, as diminished as our standards might be during this current administration, are better than other countries in the environmental safeguards that they provide. We are 27 years and counting in a war in Iraq that began when I was a high school senior at the age of 18 in 1991, through 6 successive administrations. This current president has threatened to invade Venezuela, which has the largest proven reserves of oil on the planet. For our own energy independence and national security independence, and not to fight another war, for as long as we have energy needs, I'd like to be able to produce them here. But I will tell you this, in light of what I now understand about climate change, and the devastation that we are already seeing in your state and in mine and throughout the world, I think those are votes, if I had them to do over again, I might take differently than I did. I will tell you that, as perhaps we all are, I'm inherently imperfect, but very willing to listen, to learn, and to do better going forward. I hope that that is the trajectory. When you look at the story of my life in public service, going back to my time on city council, to this moment, asking for your support to caucus for me as President of the United States going forward. So I will continue to listen to you and seek guidance from you and others when I can. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Right in front of you.
Hello. You've said a lot of things I think we all appreciate, and you said you want to help the people of Central America at home. As long as the U.S. has existed, that's meant coups, destabilization, and generally attacking the right to self-determination. If elected, what would you do in Venezuela, and can we expect more of the same U.S. imperialism?
Thank you. The First of all, I absolutely agree with the premise of your question. Whether it was a CIA-led overthrow of the democratically elected Jacob Arbenz Guzman in the 1950s in Guatemala, a coup from which that country has never recovered, or our support for rebels in Nicaragua, or for a murderous regime in El Salvador in the 1970s or the 1980s, or a drug war that we are waging not just within the borders of this country, but we are militarizing this hemisphere, hollowing out the institutions of civil society in those same countries that are producing so many of those refugees right now. We are 4% of the world's population. We consume 25% of the world's illegal drugs. They will come from somewhere. They will transit through another place to find the source of that demand. In other words, we have some culpability in what's going on in Central America and Latin America today. You asked specifically about Venezuela. I think we need to recognize Guaido as the legitimate, lawful president of that country. That's owing to their constitution and their laws. You and I may disagree, and I respect the position that you take. If you support Maduro being the president of Venezuela, I understand that. But listening to the other states in this hemisphere, we're almost in concert now in recognizing that his rule is illegitimate. Do I want to use military force to impose our will? Absolutely not. Categorically not in this Western Hemisphere. Every time that we have done it, it has almost in every instance ended up in disaster. And it's not just in the Western Hemisphere. It's Mossadegh in Iran. It's so many of our military interventions, overt or covert or otherwise right now. So using peaceful platforms for our power, economic assistance, I mentioned doubling what we are spending in the Northern Triangle of Central America right now, spending it effectively not on militarizing their police forces, but in violence prevention in their communities so that no child has to leave, making sure that we work with other countries in concert to peacefully resolve the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, making sure that we disengage from a murderous regime in Saudi Arabia that is bombing the life out of Yemen and bringing more than 7 million people to the brink of starvation and death. Yes, our foreign policy has to follow our values, and today, and not just in this administration, for so long, it has not. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Slight break. Here we go.
So we know this is a pretty historic primary, just from the candidates in the field. There are more women running, more people of color running. Pete Buttigieg is the first openly gay candidate for president running. And especially going into 2020 when Senate seats are more valuable than ever for the Democrats. Why is it more important for you to be running, or why is it more important for you to win the presidency than a potential Texas Senate seat in 2020?
Thank you for the question. Ultimately, you're going to make the determination about my value as a candidate against this extraordinary field that we have today. I agree with your assessment of this field. And I remind myself, and hopefully all of us, come summer 2020, we're all going to be on the same team, behind the same candidate, whoever she or he may be, ensuring they're successful against Donald Trump and successful in bringing this country together in January of 2021. You'll also decide what I bring to this that might distinguish me or make me different than some of those other candidates. I'll tell you, at a time that the president, for whatever reason, has successfully trained the focus of this country on the U.S.-Mexico border, I am there. It's where I was raised. It's where Amy and I are raising our kids today. I can tell a profoundly positive story about immigration and our connection to the rest of the world. I've served in a Republican-controlled Congress, and I've been able to work across the aisle to get something done, to find consensus and common ground, not allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good, and make progress. I also campaigned across what was thought to be a reliably red state in every one of the 254 counties for the United States Senate against Ted Cruz. No matter how red or rural, how blue or urban, I showed up. Showed up in King County that voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. Because the people of King County are every bit as deserving of our respect, of being listened to, of being heard, of being fought for, of being served. They're our fellow Americans, my fellow Texans, and I want to do my best for them. And though we did not prevail in this election, we ensured that everyone knew that they counted, that no one had been written off, and no one had been taken for granted. We came up 2.6% short, but there are now 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, who are in seats long held by Republicans. The composition of our state legislature, which is responsible for not expanding Medicaid at a time that the federal government was going to pay 100 cents on the dollar, for these homophobic laws that I was just describing earlier to answer the first question that was raised, that is responsible for the racial and ethnic gerrymandering that has so successfully suppressed the votes of so many of my fellow Texans. The composition of that institution has now changed as a result. And in Harris County, home to Houston, Texas, 17 African American women just won judicial positions of power. Literally changing the face of criminal justice reform in our most diverse community in the country. Texas is now in play. Texas's 38 electoral votes are now in play, both for statewide races, and there are many candidates who I think are capable of winning and will do an excellent job serving as our next senator, who are going to go up against John Cornyn in this current election. But this ability to campaign for everyone, campaign everywhere, not descend into the division and the pettiness and the partisanship. Stay elevated by our ambitions and our aspirations and what we can do together. That's what I want to contribute to this country at this moment. I want to make sure that I've done everything I can, given the challenges that we've all outlined today. And this is the best that I can do. It will be up to you to decide if it's good enough. But thank you. Appreciate the question.
Hi. So you talked in support of supporting free 2-year community college as well as debt-free college, but I see the issue as being a lot bigger than that. And education is truly a human right. I'm originally from California. I love being and going to school in Iowa, but frankly the reason I'm in school in Iowa is because it's what me and my family could afford. And a lot of friends that I have back home weren't able to go out of the state, weren't able to afford college. I don't know a young person that isn't concerned, being deeply affected, or not terrified about the cost of higher education and the way it's going to affect our lives in the future. Even here in Iowa, it's affecting so many students outside of Grinnell. The Board of Regents has just passed a multi-year tuition model that is set to increase tuition by 5% for the next 5 years. And I'm just wondering if you will take a stand for our generation against inaccessible models of education like this to really support a campaign that is really about free college for all. And if you could preface your answer with a yes or no.
Yeah. So just to be really clear, because you asked a very specific question, no, I'm not for free college for all. So I hope that is sufficiently clear. Listening to the students at Morningside College yesterday, some of the folks who work there, they're justifiably concerned that free college for all means many other smaller private institutions will no longer be able to compete. Listening to President Michael Sorrell, president of the historically black college Paul Quinn in Texas, is worried that free college for all comes at the expense of these HBCUs. I want to see them thrive. I want to see Morningside thrive. I want to see Grinnell thrive. I want to see our community colleges thrive because we've ensured that every single American can attend them without any cost. And I want to see our public universities thrive as well because we've ensured that they are debt-free. Now I know you and I come to a different conclusion on a really important policy, but I hope that we're trying to address the same need, which I agree should be a right in this country, that you are able to improve yourself. Now that may mean college, and that's great for some who want to do that. That might mean a job that pays right out of high school, because you now have your associate's degree in an early college high school, or you have an apprenticeship that ensures that you have that trade or skill that you need to build that career right away. Whatever you were intended to do in this life, write a poem, start a punk rock band, raise your family, build a highway, teach school, operate on somebody, provide mental health care at the VA. I want you to be able to do that in this country. And at a time, the other side of this question, unasked, but just as important to me, that we have $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, which is more than all the credit card debt in this country combined. At a time that 10% holding that debt are in default. The one kind of debt that you will never shake until you have paid it off or until you're in the grave. I want to make sure that we're doing more to lessen the load of our fellow Americans who are being crushed by this debt right now. The president, in his latest budget, wants to zero out the public service loan forgiveness program. The president, in his current budget, wants to take money away from federally subsidized student loan programs to build this $30 billion wall that we do not need. As president, I will make sure that if you're willing to come back to your hometown or to a community in need, work for one of those veterans in a VA where we have 45,000 positions short today, teach school, be a support staff in a community that needs it, that we wipe clear and clean that debt, and then at a minimum for those who can find no other way, we refinance their debt at much lower interest rates. I think that's something that we can do right away from day one. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
To your right, and I'm sorry if I couldn't get to your question, I only have time for these two more.
Hi, Beto. Sorry. I think, so I'm not from here, I'm from Tennessee, but I was in a similar case. 50.8% of this county went for Trump in the last election, and I think around 51% of all of Iowa went for Trump. I grew up in a very red state, and I know many people who voted for Trump. And I want to say that, these are my friends and neighbors, and they're not bad people. And so you've kind of outlined this incredibly, racist, sexist, homophobic president that we have. But I just want to say that, these aren't bad people, and that.
Yes, they are.
I think it speaks.
They are.
I think.
Let's let her.
So I think some people would say that they are bad people. I think, having very close friends who voted for Trump, I would say that they're a little bit disillusioned with the entire system, and that they felt like no candidate or the Democratic candidate who was running was not speaking to their needs and their issues. Beto, my question for you is, there's clearly this intense sense of disillusionment in the white working class in the United States, and I think you're saying great things about uplifting people of color, and I think that's so important. And I want to say I think we live in an institutionally racist nation, and that's so important. And I think that white people in this country are struggling too, and they have low qualities of life, and they, need an uplift in their economic status.
Please call the question.
I'm sorry.
You're doing good. Take your time.
Okay. So I guess my question is, can you outline a concrete economic platform that would uplift everyone in this country and ensure the quality of life for everyone?
Yeah. What a great question. Thank you. And thank you for the way that you asked the question. I was, just for some context, had a chance to read Lincoln's second inaugural address recently. And if you think about it, the guy is in the midst of a civil war that has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans to abolish the institution of slavery. And he's talking about charity for all and malice towards none. He's really trying to bring this country together, and we would forgive him if he was incredibly malicious and angry and despised the other side. And yet he resisted the temptation because he understood the only way to bind the Union back together again after this war, whenever it was going to end, is to begin with that attitude that you're not a bad person if you voted for President Trump, if you live in a different part of the country, if you've had different life experiences, if you've come to a different conclusion. It's only by accepting that we're going to be able to come together again. And listen, we have the mother of all existential challenges in front of us. If we do not get our act together in the next 10 years when it comes to climate change, lights out for this country, for the world, for our kids, and the generations that follow. So we really do need everyone at this moment. We've got to do everything that we can. A couple of ideas. I think Iowa ranks 35th in parity between what men make and what women make for the same job and the same value and the same effort given to it. Equal pay for all women in this country is a great place to start. Not discriminating in the workplace based on sexual orientation or race or gender is an important next step. Having paid family leave so that you can take the time off to raise your kids or to take care of your parents or to take care of yourself. It makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. It should be adopted universally across the country. And then access to capital. And I'm going to get to something that you just raised. If you think about how we built the wealth of this country, it was on the backs of slaves who had no opportunity to share in the fruits of what they had produced. And it wasn't just as slaves. After the abolition of slavery, segregation, Jim Crow laws, in later generations, in the lifetimes of many here, redlining that prevented some in communities of color from being able to obtain a home loan that would allow them to have wealth that they could pass on to their kids, which would be the seed capital to start a business or get an education at Grinnell or do whatever they're supposed to do in their lives. There is 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America today. So I cannot allow this answer to pass without calling that out and ensuring that while we say that there are many people suffering and trying in this country, some, as you mentioned, institutionally have been kept from the economic success that so many have enjoyed, almost as a matter of right in this country. When I listen to those in rural America, farmers, ranchers, producers, growers, all they ask is that they be able to make a profit on what they grow to feed and to clothe us and so much of the rest of the world. I mentioned earlier, they want to do their part when it comes to climate change. Give me a market incentive to plant cover crops, to use precision tilling, to grab more of that carbon out of the air so that we can get to net zero by 2030 or as soon thereafter as humanly possible. Partner with those rural communities in the way that we partnered with those rural communities during the Great Depression, the Rural Electrification Administration that partnered with cooperatives to electrify rural America so that those farmers, the majority of whom were white, and their kids could have electricity just like those in the big cities of Chicago and London and Tokyo. We have that opportunity to partner today. Understand that our criminal justice system is connected to economic opportunity in this country. Free more people to live to their full potential, literally by not putting them behind bars in the first place for nonviolent drug crimes like possession of marijuana and expunging their arrest records so that they can get a job going forward. Make sure that everyone has access to a world-class education, and as I mentioned earlier, is both career-ready and college-ready. And then the extraordinary concentration of wealth and power and privilege that exists in this country today, that none of us, no matter how old you are, have ever seen in our lifetimes, unless you were alive in the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. That must be broken up in the same way that in the last progressive era that was provoked by that concentration, broke up the trusts and the monopolies, invested in things like universal access to high school education, which did not exist before that, and made those investments in people and in communities. That way, we stand a better chance of lifting all people in this country while being mindful that some are kept down more than others. And there's much repair work to do to make sure that we do not visit that same injustice on the generations that follow. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it.
My last question.
Hello, my name is Malcolm Davis, and my question for you is sort of threefold. Firstly, are you willing to commit to recognizing gun violence as a national emergency? Secondly, are you willing to recognize the police forces of America as being perpetrators of that violence? And thirdly, are you willing to dedicate yourself to making this country a safer place for people who look like me, who are brown, who are immigrants, people who are victims to disproportionate incarceration, as well as gun violence in the hands of the police?
Thank you for the question. Yes, on this first question, we'll lose more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans this and every year that we fail to take sensible steps on gun safety. No other country comes anywhere close. And you can accept one of two conclusions. Either we are inherently violent, or evil, or bad, and there's something wrong with us as Americans. This is a natural disaster. This is what God has declared for the United States of America and our kids. Or we can accept that this is a human-caused problem with a human-based solution. In those states that have adopted universal background checks, we've seen a near 50% reduction in gun violence. Let's adopt those for every state in the union. We also know, when we listen to emergency room doctors, if you were shot by a handgun, it doesn't hit a major artery or your heart, and we get to you in time, we can save your life. If you were shot by a high-impact, high-velocity round from an AR-15, it'll blow a hole out your back the size of an orange. It'll destroy what's inside. You will bleed to death before we can get to you, because that's exactly what it was designed to do. It's a variant of a weapon that was designed, engineered, sold to the United States military to kill human beings as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a number as possible. It belongs on the battlefield. It does not belong in our streets. We should have a ban on assault weapons and military-style weapons in this country. Second, we acknowledge that our police officers, our sheriff's deputies, have among the toughest jobs in this country. To keep us safe, to put themselves out there at the risk of losing their lives, to protect and to serve their fellow Americans. And we are grateful for what they do. But we also understand that they have a level of accountability and justice that many have been able to escape when they use force against those whom they were sworn to protect, disproportionately against people of color, without accountability, without transparency, without justice, and without preventing it from happening again and again. And it continues to happen in this country. We should also acknowledge that this is part of a larger criminal justice system, which in turn is part of a larger system in this country that has a history of keeping some people down by criminalizing them based on the color of their skin. It is nothing new to the United States of America, nor is the ability for people to call attention to it by asking questions at town hall meetings, by protesting at an NFL game, by marching in the streets, Black Lives Matter, and others who are willing to put themselves out there, follow in a long tradition of those marching for civil rights, risking their lives for civil rights in this country. And so who are we to squander this heritage and this opportunity at this moment? So in addition to those comprehensive criminal justice reforms that I discussed at the outset, I want to make sure that especially when federal funds are used in local law enforcement, they come tied to the conditions that there will be full transparency, reporting and use of force against whom that force is used, and we use the laws, the civil rights laws in the United States to hold those officers accountable who abuse the power into which we have entrusted them. That's how I would meet that second question. On the larger issue, hopefully I've addressed that over the course of my comments here today and answers to your questions, but I accept the premise of your question. I know that we have a lot of work to do. That repair, it's at the root of the word reparations, begins with understanding our story, our history, who we are, how this country came to be, that civil rights is not just a story of successes across the Edmund Pettus Bridge or at the lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. It is also the story of segregation, of lynchings, of keeping people out of their democracy, as we are still doing today across this country, based on the color of their skin. Until we confront those facts, and every American, regardless of your race or ethnicity, accepts them, we will never repair the damage done or keep it from being inflicted again and again. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.